Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Reveal Mobile, How Brands and Agencies Sell Location-Based Marketing, New Ways to Use Location Data. My name is Lizzie, and I am a Senior Account Manager for the LSA, and I will be your host for today's event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask any questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. Our speakers today are Brian Hanley, who has more than 20 years of technical, operational, and executive management experience with 18 years in ad tech. He's currently the CEO of Reveal Mobile, a leader in location-based analytics, audiences, and attribution. Before Reveal, he was co-founder and CEO of Exhibitor, which was acquired by Atlas and subsequently by Microsoft. Brian's expertise spans all corporate functions, including sales, marketing, development, and finance. He is a featured speaker at many ad tech and location data events each year. He's also a frequent contributor to Forbes and Marketing Land. Dan Dillon is Vice President of Marketing at Reveal Mobile. During his 15-plus-year career as a marketing executive, he has led aspects of marketing from traditional to digital and inbound to outbound. Dan and Brian are both based in Raleigh, North Carolina, where Reveal Mobile is headquartered. A big thanks to them all for participating today. Without further delay, I will pass the mic over to Brian to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Lizzie. And welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're calling from. Again, this is Brian Hanley, CEO of Reveal Mobile, which is a mobile location platform, and happy to talk to you about the use of mobile location data. So to kick us off, a few things we'll talk about. We'll start with a little bit about the technology and how location data is acquired. We'll do a little bit on the terminology and then go over some of the providers that are in this space. I'll also do some tips and tricks, sort of what we see as best practices with some of our clients. And then we'll talk about some case studies. So we've got 4 or 5 case studies that will be pretty interesting, so stick with me for this. So first of all, how it works, if you have a mobile app and you have accepted location services with that mobile app, there is some likelihood that there is a company like Reveal Mobile that has access to that mobile location data and is doing some form of analysis on that location data. And that translates to app functionality. You can do push alerts based on that location. You can deliver content based on location data. For the most part, we see location data in our space used for analytics and for advertising. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that comes about. The location data, the use of location data in the advertising space has been around for well over a decade now. And it really started with IP-based location data. And one of the challenges with IP-based data is that it's not very accurate. You can appear like you're coming from Reston, Virginia, when in all actuality, you're in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's also not very precise. And so that was really the first foray into location-based advertising, the use of that IP address. And then that moved towards cell tower triangulation. So you sort of triangulate where a device is based on where that is positioned within 3 cell towers. And while that is accurate, it is not very precise. So you can get within a few football fields of where somebody is, but not much more accurate than that. And so today, most of the mobile location data that you see is coming as GPS-based data derived from the mobile operating system, coming again from a mobile app where you've accepted location services. And that data is accurate and much more precise than you would get from cell tower triangulated data. So today, the workflow of how that location data translates into analytics and advertising is the first piece that you need, particularly with GPS data coming from a mobile device, is privacy compliant data. So you have to have a user that is consented to the use of location data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about some of the privacy regulations. Once you have collected the location data, that location data is literally just a latitude and longitude coordinate. So unless you can translate that into something meaningful, it's just a bunch of noise. And so the next step is place matching, or you need a point of interest database. You match that coordinate with a location. Is that a Starbucks? Is that a sporting venue? Is that a business? Where does that latitude and longitude reside? And after you've matched the place, then there's other things that you can do to enrich the data. You can add some demographic data to that to further enhance the audience. And that really results in the ability to provide analytics based on foot traffic. It provides the building of audiences based on that location data. And it also allows you to provide some level of foot traffic attribution. I have a campaign, it ran, did it actually result in somebody going into a store? So we'll go into a little bit more detail around that, but first, a little bit on the technology or the terminology side. Few terms that we see in this space, one is geofencing, and that is somebody there now. Geotargeting is was somebody there. Geoconquesting was somebody at a competitor. And then you'll also hear a term called proximity marketing, and that is marketing that is based on location data that is very, very precise, down to the inch or down to mere inches. And while there is data available that is that close, it requires additional technology. It requires either near field communication or it requires Bluetooth technology, all of which requires additional hardware. So while you can get very granular on proximity marketing, that data is not available at any scale and requires additional technology in order to have it. So most of what we will talk about comes from the first three. And so how are brands using this today? We see a lot of geofencing for real-time visitors, and we have a lot of clients that are doing this. We see a lot of geotargeting for give me anybody that's been to an Advanced Auto Parts in the last 90 days as a potential audience. And then using Advanced Auto Parts as an example, if they wanted to do geoconquesting, they could say, give me anybody that's been to CarQuest in the last 90 days. And they could build audiences based on that location data. So who is the best fit? If you're looking to go talk to some potential clients, who are the best clients to go after? Obviously, anybody with physical locations could be a good client. Really, we see the threshold of the number of rooftops that you need to have in order to really be a viable candidate. And we see sort of the minimum level is about 5 locations. Sort of 15 is where you really start to get into the sweet spot, and above that, it becomes a very, very valuable tool. Now, with that said, you can have a single location and have success with that. And it varies, and it usually depends on the margin of the product. So if you're selling burritos at a single location in a strip mall, that's probably not a very good target for location data, because you're not going to get a lot of users or visitors to that store, and the margin on the product isn't large enough to create the value that you would need to buy location data. Now, on the other end, if you're selling $50,000 watches in a retail shop, if you sell one more watch by driving traffic using location data, you can easily pay for the use of location data. So I will tell you that the sweet spot's probably about 15 locations, but if you have a single location and they have a high margin product, they can also be a good fit for location data. Seasonal or specific events are also a great example. If you are releasing a new album, right? Concert goers, like I'm a big fan of the Black Keys, so I go to Black Keys concerts. So I would be a great candidate to try to sell an album to because I've been to those locations. If you are trying to sell high-performance bicycles, you might target people who have been to bicycle races. They would be a great candidate for that. So, or sporting events are great examples as well. The North Carolina State Fair is a great example, or any state fair is a great example of a venue where location data becomes important. You do not have to have a physical location for this to work for you, however. We see this working well in direct-to-consumer and in e-commerce, where physical locations are important even though you don't have one. An example of that would be Casper mattresses or Lisa mattresses. They would want to target anybody who has been to a physical mattress store to try to drive them to their online site to buy the mattresses online. And going back to the expensive watch example, if you are, maybe you don't have a retail store, but you have an e-commerce play where you're selling high-end watches, that same location audience would be important. Give me anybody who's been to the private terminal of an airport or to a yacht club or a country club or someplace where people gather that can afford $50,000 watches. Another example would be consumer packaged goods. And while most consumer packaged goods companies don't have physical locations or retail locations are important to them because that's where they sell their products. So if you have, like Procter & Gamble as an example, they have boutique hair care products where they're very interested in people who go to high-end boutique salons. So that's where location data can be important to outside of companies that have retail locations. But at the end of the day, physical locations have to be important in some way for location targeting to make sense. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I shouldn't go any further without talking about privacy. If you are looking for a vendor in the mobile location data space or in consumer data in general, you want to do the due diligence to make sure that the vendor that you select ensures that you are on the right side of any privacy regulations. And there are a number of groups that do this. The one that we recommend the most is the Network Advertising Initiative, or the NAI. It's a certification board that certifies that their partners are compliant with privacy regulations, and there's an audit that they conduct every year to make sure that that code of conduct is being lived up to. So I would look for that seal with any vendor that you look for. There are a number of other organizations that I would make sure that your vendor is a member of one or all of those organizations. There's the Future of Privacy Forum, the Mobile Marketing Association, the IAB, again, I mentioned the NAI, and the Privacy Shield Framework, which is more of a European body. So something you should look for when you're looking for a vendor. So who is selling location-based audiences today? Well, according to eMarketer, the duo of Facebook and Google in 2018 captured 58% of all digital ad spend, and I believe that's probably increased in 2019. So if you want to try to compete with the likes of Facebook or Google, you need location-based audiences at scale. So you need to pick a vendor that has location data at scale and has the ability to create audiences. The only way to compete, the reason why Facebook and Google capture so much of the ad spend is because they have huge audiences and they have lots of scale of audiences based on location and a number of other factors. So if you want to compete, you need to have scale as well. So who are some of the vendors in this space? We really look at this broadly in three categories. There's mobile audience providers, which is where we categorize ourselves. In that bucket is Gravy Analytics, Cubic, Unicast, and there's others. The differentiator here for mobile audience providers is that they only provide mobile audiences. They don't deliver media in any way, and they're highly customizable. Right? So if you have custom locations or custom date ranges, or you want to combine different audience factors, mobile audience provider is a great path to go towards. The next section in the middle is audience marketplaces, and there are a number of those, Kochava, AdSquare, Factual, Pushspring. All of these are actually partners of ours. They are marketplaces where you can go and buy a standard taxonomy of audiences. So I want McDonald's visitors, or I want shoe shoppers, and you can literally log into these marketplaces. They have drop-down menus, and you can choose what type of audience you want, and then you can go download that into whatever advertising platform you want to. So it's a little more standard audience than you would get from a mobile audience provider, but one of the advantages there is they combine more than just location data. You can get cookie-based audiences, email-based audiences, so there's marketplaces of more than just location data. And on the right side is the demand-side platforms, and that's sort of the easy button for location-based advertising. And this is a great place to start if you know you have clients that you want to do location-based advertising for, but you don't know where you want to spend the money, because these clients will, if you have a $100,000 campaign that you want to spend, they will spend the media dollars for you. So it's a sort of a one-stop shop for location-based targeting. So the future. One of the things, we talked a little bit about the privacy regulation. One of the things that's happening, and I'm sure you've probably heard of this, but CCPA, which is the California Consumer Protection Act, is coming in 2020, and it is a requirement for more transparency of what's happening with data, not just location data, but data in general, and providing more control for the users. And so in most of the time when you have an app that asks for location services or permission for location services, today you'll see essentially three choices: always on, only when in use, and never. And when CCPA comes into effect, you will likely start to see apps have yet another pop-up that gives more detail into what is happening with that data, that this data is being used for advertising, or this data may be shared with a third party for advertising or analytics or attribution, which we think is a great thing. There needs to be more transparency with what is happening with data in the industry. The challenge that we see with CCPA is that, as the name implies, it is only California. It is the California Consumer Protection Act. And the thing that we are trying to avoid is different regulation across 50 states, which would be very, very cumbersome. So we're pushing for federal regulation and legislation so that it becomes a single body or a single regulation across the entire 50 states. Attribution. And I have this as part of the future, but it's really, attribution is here today. There are a number of companies that provide attribution, and there have been. There's cookie-based attribution. If you go to a website, you can already track, did somebody then download something into a shopping cart, or did they click off to a web page? Location data-based attribution is already being used today, where you can show that a campaign is actually driving traffic to a store. So it is already here. There are a couple forms that it's taking today. One is fairly simple attribution, where you say, here's the size of the audience that saw the ads. I had 100,000 people saw the ad, and 7,000 people then went into the store based on that population. And there's no extrapolation on that, right? So it's fairly simple attribution. The other end of this is where, I know that I had 5% of the user base that went into the store. I saw that percentage of the user base. And then I can then extrapolate that of the 7,000 people, I likely saw a lot more, or we actually drove a lot more to the store. So we see, a spectrum of accuracy on the attribution front. Why is it so hard? Well, nobody has 100% of the users that go into the store, not Google, not Facebook. So it's almost impossible to show exactly how many people an ad or any sort of campaign drove to an actual store. So you have to understand what percentage of the user base that your provider sees so you can get an understanding of how that translates into foot traffic to an actual store. We'll also see a lot more integrations. Today, there are market platforms that combine different data sets, but we'll see more and more of that where you combine location data with a lot more demographic data with what's called the app graph, and that is what other apps somebody has on the phone. So you'll see more and more of that where the data will be less and less in silos and more combined across different systems. So a little bit on selling and buying, and mostly selling location-based audiences. I'll give you some of the tips and tricks that we see in the industry. One of the things that we see fairly frequently in our own customer base is trying to get too complex in terms of how location-based advertising works today. So we say, stay above the glass. Nobody's asking today how a TV ad is delivered. The important thing to understand is the size of the audience that you can reach and be very transparent with the size of that audience. If you try to if you do confuse the customer, that at best extends the sales cycle, and it can actually result in no sales. So we say stay above the glass. That's not always possible. Sometimes you have very, very tech-savvy clients and that want more information and want to dig into the details of how you come about the location-based audiences. If you do, you should rely on a digital expert, and hopefully you have one in-house. If not, you should rely on your vendor. We get called into a number of conversations with agencies, clients, to dive deep into the location technology and how the actual audiences are developed, right? It's one thing to go to a client and say, hey, I have 100,000 people that have been to your store. How do you know that? And we can go into great detail on that. And so some clients you'll need that. My recommendation is early on, make it as simple as possible. The other thing that you should keep in mind when talking about location-based audiences is what we call the look-back window. Every product has sort of a different life cycle. If you were buying a mattress, typically by the time you've decided you're going to buy a mattress to the actual purchase of that mattress is typically about 7 days. So the look-back window for your audience of people who may have been to a mattress store shouldn't be longer than 30 days because typically most people have long since bought a mattress within that 30 days. For a car, the average cycle is about 35 days from the time you start researching till the time you buy that automobile. So you could look back maybe 60 days. There are examples of I'm a golfer, all right? That doesn't change. So if you see my device on a golf course, you know that I'm probably a golfer, and I will be a golfer next year, and probably a golfer the year after next. So you can have a much longer look-back window if you're looking for a golfing audience, because that doesn't change very significantly. So make sure you understand what your clients are selling and try to get a feel for what the life cycle of that sale is as you're talking to that client. I can't stress this enough. The biggest issue that we see is people that overinflate the size of the audience that they can generate based on location data. We think it's very important to be transparent with the size of the audience that you can reach. Again, you cannot reach 100% of the people that go into a specific store. So you need to understand the size of that audience and be completely transparent with your customer. One of the things that we've seen in the past is in order to get bigger audiences, people just increase the size of the geofence that they're drawing around a specific location. And while, yes, that does increase the size of the audience, you have a lot of people that have zero interest in that actual physical location. So again, best to be transparent and honest about the size of the audience that you can deliver. Okay, now the fun stuff, some of the case studies, and we'll give you some real examples of how some of our clients have leveraged location data in their businesses. First one is with Plunge Digital, and this was a campaign that they did in conjunction with Magic Springs, which is a theme park. And they were Magic Springs was trying to increase the traffic for their 4th of July week, or their 4th of July celebrations, in particularly for the 6th of July, which they were having a fireworks show. And so Plunge Digital's objective was first to identify the appropriate audience to go after, then figure out the best way to target that audience, and then how to execute, where to go deliver those campaigns. So the slide that you're seeing today, right here comes from Plunge Digital's social intelligence platform. So this is data that Plunge Digital brought to the equation themselves. So one of the things that they looked at was age range and income level, and so they tried to find the sweet spot for who is, in terms of what income range and what age range, who is the best audience to go after for this type of campaign. And they also looked at what locations are their visitors most likely to come from. So what we found is that if a visitor had gone to Oaklawn Racing and Casino, or had eaten at a Subway or a Taco Bell recently, they were much more likely to go to the theme park in the past. So those are the locations that that the theme park targeted, as well as the income range and age range. And in terms of execution, they delivered this across both social media and through their demand side platform, which I believe they use DataZoo for the demand side platform, but they delivered 400,000 impressions. The size of the audience that they came up with based on income range, age range, and had visited those locations was about 28,000. The good news is, out of that 28,000, they had almost 13% that, after having seen the advertising campaign, actually went to the theme park, and a little over 7% that, after seeing the ad, actually went to the July 6th fireworks celebration. So the bottom line is Plunge Digital earned repeat business from the theme park. Another example, Moe's Southwest Grill. Who doesn't love Moe's? This was done in conjunction with French West Vaughn, which is an agency out of Durham, North Carolina. And this was done about the time that Chipotle announced they were coming out with a new queso, and Moe's is very, very proud of their queso, and I agree that their queso is better, and so does Moe's. And the idea was to sort of disrupt that advertising from Chipotle. They wanted the Moe's app to be downloaded, as well as coupon redemption for a free queso. And they were advertising across social media, primarily Facebook. The target audience for them was anybody that had been to a Moe's in the last 90 days, anybody that had been to one of their direct competitors, and then indirect competitors, fast casual, Mexican dining, in the area around their target stores. The audience size is about 20,000 people. That audience got pushed to Facebook, and there was an 85% match rate with Facebook's audience, which is very typical. So you import a list of mobile device IDs, and Facebook looks to find how many of those people are actually members on Facebook. In this case, there was 85% match, which again is fairly typical. The great news is here that there was a 67% increase in the conversions for that mobile coupon based on that location-based audience versus Facebook's own audience targeting. And the difference is, as Moe's, you can target Moe's followers and people who like Moe's on Facebook. You can't target people who like or follow Chipotle or Qdoba. And so French West Vaughn used both Facebook's audience targeting for Moe's fans as well as this location-based audience, and the location-based audience performed better than the Facebook's own audience targeting. The other thing that's important about this campaign is that if you typically, if you bring your own audience data to Facebook, the campaigns tend to be less expensive on Facebook. That's not always the case, as you'll see in this next example, or in one of our next examples. So the next one is Finding Elvis. Who doesn't love Elvis? Well, if you really love Elvis, you would know that Sony Music released a new Elvis album last year, a new Elvis gospel album. I did not know that. And the idea for the campaign was to drive more downloads of this digital album. And this was done in conjunction with Gupta Media, which is Sony's agency of record. So if you are an Elvis fan, what is the location that you're most likely to go to if you are a true Elvis fan? And that is Graceland. And so they looked at anybody who had been to Graceland over a period of time. And again, this is an example of where the look back window can be interesting, right? If you go to Graceland, even if you went to Graceland 3 years ago, you're still probably an Elvis fan. So, you know, a 30-day look back window would be way too short on something like this. So we saw 13,000 people that had been to Graceland over whatever time period they had looked at, which I don't remember. And that got imported into Facebook, and there was an 88% match rate across Facebook with this audience. So clearly a lot of Elvis fans on Facebook. Performance, they reached 55% of the target audience in the first week, which was fantastic. CPM rate on this using the location-based audience was about 35% higher than on the Facebook audience, which is not typical, but in this case it was. But it was 20% lower than trying to reach that audience across their email list. Good news is they had a 1.7% click-through rate, and the ads got shared a number of times. So it earned repeat business from Sony through Gupta Media. And as a matter of fact, now Sony uses location-based targeting for most of their album releases, and they look back at concert goers as potential catalysts for downloads of new audiences. All right, next case study, Black Friday, and that's coming up. So let's get prepared. This was an interesting campaign. It was done in conjunction with a local TV station, and they were working with a shopping center that said, hey, we'd love to do a television campaign for Black Friday and try to drive people to our Black Friday shopping event. But they didn't give them enough notice. The TV station said, we can't produce a television commercial and get it out there in time to do this promotion. So they thought they had lost the business. When one of their account executives said, so if we were able to provide a digital campaign instead of a television-based campaign, but we can show you foot traffic metrics about the visitors for that shopping center before, during, and after the campaign, would that be interesting to you? And the shopping center said, absolutely. We would love to have that information. So they tried this this digital campaign as a test to see how many people they could drive. So they targeted anybody who had been to that specific mall over the past 90 days, as well as to malls in the surrounding area. The messaging was win $1,000 in the Black Friday cash tube giveaway, and that's one of those glass tubes that you get into and the wind is blowing up, and you're trying to grab dollar bills out of the air, so lots of fun. The campaign had 60,000 impressions. It ran right before Black Friday, and it was delivered using Zap 360, which is a video-based platform. So instead of television advertising, they used the same video ad, but they did it across a video platform. They delivered 61,000 impressions with a 0.5% click-through rate, and they had 313 tap to clicks, and that's essentially 313 people that registered for the Black Friday cash tube giveaway. And the good news for the television station was that they renewed the campaign for an additional 12 months after that. So it was a great test, very successful. Everybody was happy. So that is the end of the case studies. I'll give my 30 seconds of the sales pitch. Reveal Mobile has a product called Visit Local, and it is a location-based platform that provides essentially 3 areas. It provides analytics, that if you have a client that has physical locations, you can go in, enter that client's name, and we will literally provide a foot traffic analysis on your client that you can take in and show the client how much you know about their business even before you get their business. We also have an audience builder, which is exactly like it sounds. You can go in and build an audience of people who have been to locations over certain time frames. And we also have an attribution, a foot traffic attribution platform, which if you run a campaign, we will show you the foot traffic over time, before, during, and after the campaign. And we show that in near real time. The data is only 2 or 3 hours old. And we can show your clients how they performed against their competition. So 3 components of the platform, very interesting. Happy to talk further about that. But without further ado, I would love to open it up to questions and turn it over to Dan Dillon, our VP of Marketing.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Awesome content. We've had 3 questions roll in during the course of the webinar. And as a reminder, folks on the webinar, you're welcome to enter questions at any time in the questions box. So the first question for you, Brian, is the case study you showed used age and income data along with location data. What other data points are advertisers using to refine their targeting strategies?
Well, there's a number of data points that can be leveraged, and some of that depends on the other platforms that you might be integrated with. We see a lot of integration with things like household income, home value, education level, a lot of demographic data. We also see companies that tie mobile device IDs to the email addresses associated with those mobile ad IDs. And that, I will tell you, takes the integration with a third party like a LiveRamp or a BDEX to tie those 2 things together. So there's a number of things. It's sort of the sky is the limit in terms of what those variables are.
Okay. Next question is around privacy. You mentioned CCPA. How are you ensuring that you're compliant with CCPA?
So we work with a number of groups that are at the forefront of privacy on CCPA, but we work with a company called Wirewheel that is a technology play that ensures that our partners are consent and that we have consent to leverage location data, and we have the pass-through of our consent to our partners to ensure that there is no fear of being sideways against the regulations. And even as other states come out with additional regulations, we have the technology partners to ensure that those privacy regulations are adhered to.
All right, and last question, unless anyone else has any others, please go ahead and enter those if they occur to you. Can you give an example of how brands are using location data to prove attribution?
So sure, there are a number of examples that we have in-house today. The best way is to understand the size of the audience that you can deliver against, and then leverage a platform that can then show with a certain precision that users have been to specific stores. There are a number of campaigns. Our tech platform can do that, but we're certainly not the only one. There are a number of attribution platforms that will show you that a campaign was delivered, and it doesn't even have to be a digital campaign. It can be television. If you have a radio ad or a television ad that is being delivered for let's say Advanced Auto Parts, you can then show here's how many people potentially heard that ad, and then here's how many people went into an Advanced Auto Parts after having heard that either radio advertisement or television advertisement.
All right, awesome. It looks like those are all the questions we had come in. Lizzie, let me pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Brian and Dan. Great questions and discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed the webinar, and I'm sure most of you guys did too. So thank you guys so much at Reveal Mobile for putting this together. So since that ends our webinar, if you're interested in viewing this and other previous LSA webinars, simply visit our website, thelsa.org, and navigate to Insights, followed by Webinars. Thank you guys so much again for joining us today. Please be sure to visit thelsa.org and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. I hope everyone has a great day.